Hi, this is Alex from devstories.eu. OpenAPI and Swagger Ecosystem, Episode 12 of 19. Applying security is a balancing act. You want to lock down the entire vault globally, but leave the lobby open for visitors. To do that without locking yourself out, you need to understand how OpenAPI applies security requirements. Once you have defined your security schemes in the components section of your OpenAPI document, you have to actually attach them to your endpoints. You do this using the security array. This array contains security requirement objects, which reference the names of the schemes you built earlier. You can declare this security array in two places: globally at the root of your OpenAPI document, or locally inside a specific operation object. If you define it at the root, every single endpoint in your API inherits that requirement. If you define it inside an operation, it overrides the global configuration completely. It does not merge with the global settings, it replaces them entirely. Imagine a scenario where you set a global requirement that every API route needs a bearer token. That secures the vault, but you also have a login route. If the login route inherits that global token requirement, new users can never authenticate because they do not have a token yet. You have to override the global lock. A common mistake is simply omitting the security field on the login operation, assuming that implies no security. If you leave the field out, the operation just defaults to the global requirement, and your users are locked out. To explicitly allow anonymous access, you must define the security array on the login operation and put an empty object inside it. That empty object tells OpenAPI that the requirement to access this specific endpoint is nothing at all. The global lock is bypassed, and visitors can reach the lobby. This is where it gets interesting. The way you structure items in the security array dictates the logic of your authentication. It handles both logical OR and logical AND scenarios based purely on object boundaries. If your array contains two separate security requirement objects, for example, one object asking for an API key and a second separate object asking for OAuth2, that creates a logical OR. The API will accept a request if the client satisfies either the first object or the second object. If you need a logical AND, you change the boundaries. Let us say a request must have both an OAuth2 token and a custom header signature. You put both of those scheme names inside a single security requirement object. Because they share the same object, the API requires all of them to be valid before letting the request through. When you write these objects, you map the name of your scheme to an array. If you're using OAuth2 or OpenID Connect, that array lists the specific scopes required for the operation, like reading or writing data. If you're using an API key or a basic HTTP scheme, scopes do not apply, so you must map the scheme name to an empty array to satisfy the specification. The physical structure of your security array is your primary tool for defining access logic. Master the boundary difference between listing items in the array versus listing items within a single object, and you can build any authentication flow your system needs. That's all for this one. Thanks for listening and keep building.